Sarah and Garr was the younger sister to Abel Garr, who was Phyllis's grandfather. Sarah writes in her own words, "My parents joined the church in 1840. My mother and oldest brother died before we began the journey west. I was then 8 years of age, and with my father, brothers and sisters, began the journey across the plains in the company of Jedediah Grant. I walked most of the time, but rode when I became too tired, and during the rides I remember spending time picking the briars from my feet. Grant's wife and baby died during the journey across the plains, but I still can remember climbing up on the side of the wagon and looking at the baby. I recall the stampeding of the cattle when we got in with the buffalo trains unit, being frightened by the Indians. We had 100 pounds of flour when we started our journey, and the rest cornmeal. The flour was saved for the people who were sick, and frequently I wanted to be sick in order that I might have some flour. We arrived in the valley in September of 1847, camped east of the old fort, and later lived for some time in a one-log room in the fort. We did that for 2 summers. Our first permanent home consisted of a 3-room adobe house, the first to be built outside the fort. Rodney Badger made the adobes, and my father, who was a mason, built the house. It was too late in the season to plant crops, and food was scarce. We had only 2 meals a day, one in the morning and one at sundown. Moldy bran combined with thistle made our bread. The thistles, when peeled, tasted very much like turnips. We took the fresh ox hide and dipped it in scalding water, then scraped them. This was boiled for hours, and being so tough would last a long time. We killed all of our oxen, but one team to furnish food. The bread was made in the form of a cake, a 6-quart pan, and we were given 1 piece each at a meal. The children often begged for more to eat. Flour became so scarce that they traded a pound of butter for a pound of flour. During the summer of 1848, I helped drive the crickets into the City Creek, which flowed at the north of the fort through the 17th Ward. We hoped in this way to drown the pests and save the crops. We had a small patch of peas in our first lot, from which we picked bushels and bushels of peas. These with weed greens and ox hides formed our principal food. We did no spinning for a year or 2, as we had no flax or wool. We dyed cloth with the bark of trees and used the wagon covers to make dresses. My sister sold a silk dress for calico for a dress for herself and a baby. Later, we did some spinning and made a little homespun cloth and wool bats. I recall something of my limited school days when we lived near Nauvoo. There were several schools, but the first school in Salt Lake was in the 15th Ward in 1848. It was conducted by Abigail Abbott. Meetings were held in the old Bowery on Temple Square. After 2 years, my father and 2 other men took up Antelope Island in the Great Salt Lake for a cattle ranch. We crossed the island by means of a horse and wagon over sandbars, which were covered with coarse salt. Here I helped my father take care of the cattle. The east of the island was green in the summer, and the west side was green in the winter. The cattle lived upon the green slopes of our dried grass. Here I'd like to make a note. Why on Antelope Island? There was no schools on the island, so she went the years that she lived on Antelope Island without formal schooling. Also, Church Dairy was started on Antelope Island. This was located near Dairy Spring, about 4 miles north of the Garr Ranch House. It is believed the dairy was run by the women while the men would care for the island ranch. About 20 cows were milked each day. Milk, cream, cheese, and butter were taken to the mainland to be sold. In the future, Sarah would never allow her daughters to learn how to milk cows on the Burton farm because she felt indignant and that she had to do this chore on the island while men folks sat in the house. And Sarah continues her writing. My father died while we were living on the island, and at age 15, I returned to Salt Lake, where I lived in the 15th Ward with my sister Nancy. At the age of 17, I married Robert Taylor Burton in February, and she became his 3rd wife. And she goes on and says, and lived with his family while my husband was on a mission, the mission was the Martin Willie Handcart Rescue. And we spent considerable time, and another time she says, we spent considerable time patching and filling the powder horns and making bullets as my husband was sent to Tooele to guard the mail on the Pony Express from California. And this was during the Civil War time. So I don't have anything else that she's written, but as you can see, Robert T. Burton was a very busy man. With his multiple missions and being colonel in charge of one regiment of 265 men in the Utah militia, there were 3 regiments in the Utah militia, and he was over one of them, and also being a counselor in the presiding bishopric for 30 years, he was gone often. He married his first wife in Nauvoo, and 10 years after that marriage, in February 7th on 1865, on that day he married Susan Ellen McBride and Sarah Ann Garr. Those were the 3 wives he had for his entire life. He had 10 children with Maria, his first wife, and he had 5 children with Susan, and he had 12 children with Sarah. After Sarah had 5 sons and 1 daughter, the Burton City home became very crowded. In the spring of 1869, Sarah moved her children to a lath and plaster home built for her on the Burton 90-acre farm on State Street. This home included a 2-story part in the front with a parlor and bedroom downstairs divided by a hall and stairway which led to 2 bedrooms upstairs. The back section was 1 story and had a large room used as a living room with a smaller bedroom on the southwest corner and a pantry and a lean-to kitchen on the northwest part. Under the kitchen was a cistern for rainwater. A trap door was raised and water dipped out for washing and bath. Later, Maxwell, the florist that she used quite often, designed a large heart-shaped lawn and garden in front of her home, a driveway for a horse and carriage, and led from the street to the front of the home, around the heart-shaped garden back out to the street again. In 1869, her children ranged from 10-year-old Henry Fielding to her 3-month baby-old son, Elbert Turner. In the second part, I will tell what it was like living on the farm away from her husband with her children.